Frank Hyder is a well-known, renowned visual artist. When he started to become an artist, he thought the journey would be a straightforward progression. Over the years, he has discovered that the road has many twists and turns, numerous hills and valleys, and countless challenges. Through this series of short stories, tales, and remembrances, his hope is that these will offer some valuable insight into the life of an artist and what's involved in becoming an artist. In the end, he has come to realize that he is not a painter or sculptor or anything in particular. He is more simply a creative person with great passion and love for the process of making art concerning people and the world around us, who shares his artworks with the public. Join us now as we listen to another episode of A Life in Art series.
For more than 30 years, a major body of work that I've worked on and in and out of has been known as the Shaman series. Those images generally started based on a visit that I had made to the Amazon when we made our first journey to Venezuela back in 1990. At the very end of our visit to Venezuela, which was about 4.5 months, I had the opportunity to go into the Amazon and see it firsthand. While I was there, I was made aware of the fact that the Amazon was literally being consumed by fires to create farmland, that there were gold miners in Brazil and iron miners in Venezuela, and different parts of the Amazon were being exploited, and the indigenous people who were living there for thousands of years were basically in the way of this development. And I became aware of the fact that they were literally being hunted from the backs of trucks and gunned down. It was a real kind of a holocaust of a sort, and really was not something that was being brought to the public's attention. It seemed far away in another world. So anyway, I came across a book of images, of photographs of the Yanomami people, who were a tribe who had been discovered in the Amazon somewhere in the late 1950s, and they had their very first contact with people from the outside world. And in these photographs, which I saw, a germ of an idea began to emerge. So when I came back to Philadelphia, I began to, using those photographs as a starting point, I would draw onto wooden panels faces that I had selected out of this book, then put the book away and begin to paint on these things. And as was my custom, I would at times carve into them with chisels and then put more paint. I would add pieces of chipped away wood with nails and paint on that again. And one painting, I started with the idea I'll do one painting, and then pretty soon I had 2, then I had 3, then I had 5, then I had 10, and the number kept multiplying to the point where I had about 60 of these on the wall in my studio at the same time. At that moment, I had to leave my studio to go to the University of Washington in Bellingham, where I was being brought in as a visiting artist. And as a visiting artist, I got to look at student work and got to visit local museums. And then an artist friend took me to Vancouver, which is not too terribly far away in Canada, where they had a museum of the American Indians of North America. I was struck in that museum by a couple of things. One was the quantity of things that they had collected and the nature of the things that had been collected. So there were these enormous carved totem poles and these wonderful masks and all manner of canoes and dugouts and things like that. But they had gathered so many elements from these people. It was as if the Canadian government had realized that in America, in the United States, as the westward expansion took place, everything sort of got plowed under, and much of what existed from the Indian cultures was lost. So the Canadian strategy was, let's just gather all these things to put them into a museum, and we'll figure it out later. And so they had so much stuff that was in these cases that they couldn't even label it all. And they had drawers that were so filled that you could pull the drawer out. And so you could see things. They put a layer of glass over top of these drawers, and they put these cases with all this stuff in them. They had these glass boxes. And I began to think about how the glass was an element in the viewing. And the glass was like an invisible barrier between those cultures and our own culture. And I became obsessed with that idea that the glass was a factor. And so I couldn't wait to return to my studio in Philadelphia, because I really thought that these heads that I've been working on, if I could add a glass element to them, it would make a difference. I can remember coming back from the airport and stepping into my studio and putting my bag down and looking around the room for any glass at all that I could find to hold up in front of one of these paintings just to get a feeling for it. And the next day, I went out and got cut pieces of plexiglass to the size of these pieces I was making, which were all about 24 inches square. And I began to attach the glass in front of the paintings, and then figure out how to make that integrate. And one of the things that I would do is I would put black paint over top of the glass and then wipe it away. And then you could see the image through the glass, but it really began to give me that feeling of that separation that I was looking for. And so as I worked on them, adding the color to the glass over the color of what was underneath, and then rubbing the black away, I really began to feel like I had isolated an image that really was summarizing what I was feeling based on a trip to both a Canadian museum and to the Amazon forest in South America. And so this body of paintings preoccupied me to the point that there was a visit to my studio conducted by Ann Temkin, who at that time had taken over the role of curator of contemporary art at the Philadelphia Museum. And they had scheduled a bus trip for what they referred to as young collectors to visit 3 artist studios in the city of Philadelphia. One of them was an artist by the name of Phoebe Adams, who was gaining pretty much reputation in New York. The other was an older artist by the name of Bill Freeland, who had a pretty good reputation in New York. And then I was kind of the man in the middle. And so I remember this crowd of 35, 40 people in my studio, and I was standing there looking at the room and talking with people, and Ann Temkin said to me, as she looked at this wall with all these heads with the plexiglass and painting on top of, she said to me, these are just absolutely marvelous. And I said, you like them? And she said, oh, I like them quite a lot. And I said, well, I'm glad to hear that, because I had just submitted them for a competition to be included in the new convention center that was being built in Philadelphia. And I said, because I just got a letter from them yesterday telling me that they found the work far too ethnic for public display. And she said, ethnic? I don't quite understand that at all. And I said, well, neither did I, but it's great to know that you liked them. And I don't know what happened after that visit, but about 2 weeks later, I got another letter asking me to resubmit my images. And they managed to find a place in the convention center for 8 of those heads, and they're still hanging right there in that spot at 13th and Arch in Philadelphia. Anyway, after coming out of that body of work, I got an invitation from an art dealer in San Francisco to come to San Francisco and work in a print studio with a master printer. I had never done that before. I certainly, as I had explained earlier, my earliest roots in learning how to make art involved making woodcuts and learning how to carve them and print them, etc. And I hadn't really done much with that other than the fact that my paintings looked like giant woodcuts that I never printed. But now I was being given an opportunity to make prints, and I had to think about how I was going to do that and what I was going to do with it. So what I ended up doing was I took with me the elements that I was using. So in other words, I carved an image of a Yanomami face into a block of wood. I had a piece of plexiglass, and I had these different ideas, but I didn't quite know how to make an image. And I, forgot that in printmaking, you oftentimes reverse the process to get the image you want. So when you print something, you think it's going to be facing right and it's facing left, etc. So anyway, I arrived in San Francisco. I went to the print shop, and this wonderful guy who was what they call a Tamarin printer, a master printer who had studied at the Tamarin Institute, we shook hands, and he, not knowing me, or he knew a little bit about my work, he had seen images. He asked me what I would like to do, and I took out my package with these elements, and I showed him the things, and I said, but I can't figure out how to do this. And he looked at it, and he said, I think I can help you right away. So he said, you're going backwards. Let's go the other way, and let's try it this way. So what we did, he showed me how to set it up, take the piece of plexiglass and paint on the plexiglass, and we ran that through the press a few times. And every time I would run it through, I would make some changes in the painting, get it a little closer to what I was looking for. And then the last thing we would do was we would put ink on the wood block and run that through the press on top of what we had done. And as soon as we did that, the image just came together instantly, and it was absolutely a terrific print. And I knew that we had done something really refreshing. And so, he turns to me and he said, this is going to be a good experience. He said, I can tell already. And I said, why is that? He said, well, one reason, he said, you obviously learn quickly. And two, you have so many new ideas that I'm going to have a hard time keeping up with you. So we began working, and over the course of a week, we created 80 prints, which was really an exciting thing for me. And the gallery was delighted because they were selling well, and it introduced me to another way of making a very, very personal print that really had an identity unto itself. So when I returned to Philadelphia, one of the things I did was I bought a printing press and began making many more of these prints on my own. One of the great things about making prints like that, the painting, the power that these prints had was right up there with a painting. They were really, really strong and clear. And they were on paper. I could transport them quite easily. So shortly after this episode, I went to South America, and I carried with me about 50 of these prints, and I was able to make an installation in a public space of these prints and get a really great feedback from the audience and people. And it was suddenly portability had entered my work in a refreshing new way. The process of making those prints really encouraged me to explore printmaking more and more and more deeply. And so over the years, I've improved my printmaking skills by adding techniques such as shinkolei. And shinkolei is a process where you collage paper into an image. You print 2 or 3 things all at the same time, and it all comes together as a kind of collage painting. And so printmaking had entered my life now in as vibrant a way as it had when I was 8 years old, but at the same time, it was a highly personalized way of making images and making paintings. So the Shaman images were well known. There are five of those prints in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I have 12 of them in the collection of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Caracas, Venezuela. I have several of them in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Maracaibo. I have them in university collections and in a number of private collections all over the United States. And all of that sort of came out of that initial impulse to want to talk about the dialogue that I was having with seeing these endangered and threatened people in this endangered landscape. And again, going back to that policy or idea that I had formed when I was at the Skowhegan School, which is the notion that it's all, for me, the rest of my career was always going to be about the relationship between the figure and the landscape.
Thank you for listening. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to Frank Hyder on Facebook or Instagram. We hope to see you at one of the next A Life in Art episodes.